Follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram. Subscribe on YouTube. Don't forget to like. 28 Years Later comes out in a couple of days, so I wanted to revisit the two films before it. Now, as many of you probably have the same question as me, where is 28 months? But we'll get to that later in the video. So I'll begin with 28 Days Later, we'll move on to 28 Weeks, and then I'll kind of compare the both of them together. So in 28 Days Later, Danny Boyle creates a new type of survival horror movie. It's kind of like Resident Evil, where there's a virus. Well, not a virus, it's more like well, yeah, it is a virus, but it's more like a human instinct or human emotion that's been amplified. Before I get into a little bit of the story, though, I do want to say that the strong things, the very memorable things, the very signature things about 28 Days Later is the soundtrack. That theme, In the House in a Heartbeat, is forever an iconic song to have been made for a survival horror film. The cinematography is extremely well done. It's like Kino cinematography on a shit camera. Low quality, lo-fi digital tape. It looks like you're watching a home video and you're watching CCTV, which kind of does increase the immersiveness. It's not quite found footage, because I really just hate found footage movies. There's only like maybe 2 or 3 I can think of that I actually enjoy because the story is engaging enough for me to ignore the annoying handheld camera look. And the strongest thing I think about 28 Days Later is that it focuses on a small personal circle of people, which makes it feel more intimate. It makes me as the audience care more about the people that I'm on this journey with, this nightmare, this dream, this surreal situation. But anyways, about the rage virus, we got this monkey who's set up in this Clockwork Orange type environment where he's kind of bound to a bed and is being fed images of riots and chaos and just very primal, violent behavior. And then these like idiot animal activists come in thinking they're going to liberate the chimpanzees from a bunch of evil scientists. But really what they do, the whole reason that the rage virus breaks out COVID style is because of the PETA activist group, the PETA people. PETA is a terrorist organization is what I'm saying. Of course, without the Anthony Fauci of the film creating this rage virus, it wouldn't have existed. But also without the deranged leftist PETA organization, it wouldn't have gotten out. So you could say that in the beginning, both parties are equally responsible, as just one is intentionally evil and the other is ignorantly evil. And the scientist says something about like, we're trying to control rage, which you would think might be a good thing. But sometimes rage is a very useful emotion for humans. And I'm not saying that you should just be out, like the people in LA who are just burning down Little Tokyo for Mexico. Rage can be used in a very tactful way. But when you got a bunch of idiots who are just destroying the city for reasons to make themselves seem virtuous, that's not tactical rage. That's just opportunism. But anyways, let's get back to 28 Days Later. 28 Days Later has a lot of tense moments that are set up really well. Like the scares, they're not really jump scares. They're not your traditional jump scares. Like they do have jump scares, but they're done very strategically, like there's a purpose for them. For example, when our characters encounter the zombies, it's usually a consequence of something. So for example, when Jim, our character, wakes up from a coma and he's basically, here's the crazy thing, imagine you're waking up from a coma, you didn't even realize you were in a coma, and you wake up in the apocalypse. It's like a nightmare. You're exploring the city to slowly find out that the world seems to have come to an end. And his first encounter with the infected is at a church, people seeking salvation or repentance. And that also sets up a nice intro to this very impactful explosion that saves his life. Then he meets Selena, who's going to be a contrasting character to his worldview. Both of their worldviews are going to be dramatically different because Jim is barely waking up in this apocalyptic situation, whereas Selena has been surviving through it. So her morale has been destroyed, whereas Jim is still almost in a dream. And as they travel together, Jim wants to see if his parents have survived. But when he gets home, his parents left a message for him because he was in this coma, and they're basically like, we're sleeping with you now, son, don't wake up. And here is where we get our first consequence jump scare. Because Jim is new to this world, he doesn't understand the rules of survival. So while they're staying in his home for the night, because it's too dark to travel, he lights a candle to continue down memory lane inside of his home. But this candle, because it illuminates, it draws in more of the infected, and it puts them in a dangerous situation. And the tense moments, these consequence moments, they happen a few times, but it's not overdone. So for example, another scene that has a consequence to it is when they encounter this new family, remaining parts of a family. We meet Frank, the father, and his daughter, Hannah. And when they all kind of meet up and decide, we'd be better off together as a unit because separately they're just two people and two people. So it's like a split group of two and two. But together they have potential to survive longer. And it is here where we get the call to adventure, where Frank shows them a radio signal from a military post that's offering safety and a cure for the virus. So our next consequence comes from the journey, because in order to survive, you do have to put yourself in danger. And as they're driving out of London, they come into this tunnel where basically they pop one of their tires. And a consequence is just that they decided to take this tunnel in the first place because apparently it was shorter, but they also set themselves up as bait for the infected. So moments where the infected show up, it's not like they just pop up out of nowhere. There was a choice made, and the consequence was you drew the infected to your position. I think the most heartbreaking consequence, though, was Frank's final moment when they get to the outpost and discover there's no military there. And Frank has a bit of an outburst, a tiny tantrum, if you will, that causes him to be infected from a crow. It's so sad how something so small had such a devastating impact on Frank's choices. Aside from these very tense moments of consequences, there was also very small and impactful moments that were very hopeful, like when Jim and Selena first meet Frank and Hannah for this first time. They have a small toast with some kind of mysterious green alcoholic beverage, but it was like a new beginning. These people were meeting for the first time, and we knew that they were going to be on an adventure together. And so that was the start of a new relationship for everybody. And as they were leaving London, after surviving the tunnel consequence, they have this moment where they stop by a grocery store, and it's like perfectly stocked. It's almost very dreamlike. It seems like everyone out here has gone through the whole COVID scamdemic and knows what it's like to walk into a grocery store and a bunch of shelves have been just emptied. But in 28 days later, everything was perfectly stocked. It was crazy. I was like, that's not what it looked like. And we weren't even dealing with infected, virus-raged people. We're just dealing with regular raged people. Yeah, and then them just enjoying little things like when they seen the wild horses, and it just seemed like Earth was kind of normal, just enjoying seeing wildlife flourish. And then when Selena, she has a positive arc in her character journey when she has her first kiss with Jim, and she says, I was wrong. There was more to life than just survival. When she sees the relationship between the father and daughter, Frank and Hannah, and she understands like survival is not enough. Like, you can survive, but we as humans, we're community based. We need each other. And then we get to the layer of final conflict with the military. Though I will say the one weakness, I mean, I forgive it because it's a film, but 1 month for a platoon of soldiers to kind of lose their minds, I think that's a little too soon. I could see it being like maybe a few months in to kind of lose it like that. But anyways, that's kind of a small nitpick. But it does show that even though the group of soldiers become the physical antagonizing force for Jim and Selena and Hannah, it gives Jim this opportunity to evolve as well. Because when we meet him, he is the audience. He is our perspective. He's brand new to this nightmare world, adjusting to the terror and the violence. But he's also trying to keep together this idea of caring about other people, caring about your family, having a connection with people, but also protecting that relationship. When the military squad basically decides like, hey bro, we gotta execute you because we're trying to smash these hoes over here. He basically becomes the human version, the very concentrated human version, the tactical version of rage that I was talking about earlier. And it leads for a great final conflict, a climax between Jim and the remaining soldiers, and shows that rage can be used to protect things you love as well. Which if the scientists had removed that part of our human behavior, Jim would not have been able to do. It's not like they were creating the cure then, but I'm just saying in general, if these scientists had figured out a way to remove rage from humans, you wouldn't have those moments from Jim where he stepped up to protect what was important to him without using rage in its most concentrated form. So to basically wrap up what 28 Days Later is all about, it's a small story about a makeshift family. Jim, our protagonist, maintains the importance of family. Selena, whose only motive was survival, becomes open and hopeful about the opportunity of having a new family. Frank, the father, provides a reason for them to take the journey to become closer. And Hannah was probably the worst actress in this film. I love 28 Days Later, but God, she was awful as an actress. Her character was important, but her as the performing artist, the performing actress, she was terrible. Before we move on, let's stop for a quick 10-second commercial break. The Stars and Stripes Freedom Deck ships exclusively in the United States. Available on eBay and Etsy, link in the description below. 28 weeks later, only the interesting thing about this film is just how an outbreak spreads. Even though the film takes place after the initial outbreak, it's somewhat contained, but then you see it spread again. So that's kind of like the only interesting thing is you kind of see how the outbreak becomes uncontainable. But other than that, it's not really good. When they opened the film, I think they were trying to ramp up the intensity by showing an infected attack happening much sooner, but it doesn't feel as impactful as in 28 Days Later because we haven't really gotten to know our key characters. Why are they important? And another thing too is in 28 Weeks Later, because now the American military is involved and they've contained part of London or Britain, whatever, they're saying, okay, these certain areas that we've contained are safe enough for people to move back. It just seems more like, 28 weeks is only 6 months-ish. It's like around that much time. It really should have been 28 months later, because 28 months is a little over 2 years. That seems like a more reasonable amount of time to start bringing back citizens to a place that was almost overrun by infected rage monster people. And even 28 months would still seem a bit soon to bring people back to a place that was once hell on earth. So I don't know. They really should have went with something different for 28 weeks later, like maybe another surviving party, or maybe if they would have came back to Jim and Selena and Hannah, and maybe that hopeful ending they had in the first film still had a journey to survive through to get to the next point. And the thing about 28 weeks later is that there's shifting protagonists, so you don't really know who you're going to follow. You think you know who you're going to follow. You think you know who's going to be the main character of the story, but it kind of shifts because the main characters keep on dying, or the people who appear to be the protagonists just get kind of 86th out of the film. And then there's just a weird over-optimism from the military who's just like, what are you talking about? It's safe enough to bring people back. There's like one military doctor who's like, I don't think people should be coming back yet, at least not kids. What would it make the difference? Like, why does it matter if you're bringing kids or adults back? You probably should just think like, I don't think this place is safe for anybody to come back. Sergeant or commander or whatever the hell the ranking was of Idris Elba. And the one thing too about the kids in this film, every time a kid is involved in the plot, all they do is fuck up the vibe. Like in the very beginning of the film with the first infected attack, it's like this kid who's running for his life and he's like, open the door, and they open the door, but he brings all the infected people. And then when the kids from the father protagonist, when they finally come back to London, their first idea is like, let's go back to our old house in the restricted area. So it's like always the kids who are just ruining the safety of everybody. Like, you stupid kids, you're grounded. But anyways, the kids, their motive for leaving into the restricted area is because they want to go and get pictures of their mom because she apparently died. So they're like, the son's like, I don't even remember what she looks like. What if I forget? And it's like, well, hey kid, they're cleaning up the infected zones. They're not going to like destroy your house. Eventually you got to get to a point where you can go back home and grab pictures and whatnot. But they're like, no, we're not going to wait for that. We're going to leave now while it's restricted and forbidden. And I get it. There's like, they need to give a reason for them to find their mom who survived. But to go and just get some photos doesn't seem like the most believable motive. But anyways, they do find their mom, and we find out as the audience that, oh my God, as the military doctor is examining her, she has some kind of immunity in her blood that makes her, I guess not an immune, she's a carrier. So though she doesn't behave like the infected, she just carries the virus. But that's basically what causes this outbreak. These kids go back, they bring their mom, and then the mom basically lays a kiss of death on the father, and then the father becomes an antagonist. He went from protagonist to antagonist, and then our new protagonist is Jeremy Renner as a sniper. And that was one interesting tense moment, was the military order to slaughter all the citizens that have returned because of the outbreak, because it became uncontainable, and they're like, you know what, we just got to kill everybody. It just was like one of those things too, is like, wow, that must have been difficult to do. Like, you're sent to restore order and to make this lost city inhabitable again, and then now you're like, you know what, the sergeant said we got to kill everybody. So it's like, our mission was to make this place livable, but now we're just going to kill everyone that's here, you're dead. So the military's motive was literally contain or exterminate, and exterminate was the unfortunate consequence of bringing people back too soon. So 28 Days Later just like it didn't know what to focus on, and it didn't feel personal, which is why I think people don't really talk about 28 Weeks Later the way they talk about 28 Days Later. All right, so my thoughts on both films. I would say that the quality of 28 Days Later it's a bit more gritty, especially with the texture of the film that they used. Well, the tape, it's digital camcorder home video quality tape. But the framing is very well intended. The shots are very well intended. The cinematography is A1. It's like if you gave like a 5-star chef your kitchen pantry, and your kitchen pantry is like a regular person's like kind of bullshit, but you give it to a 5-star chef and they're going to make some quality H2O. And 28 weeks later, the image is very clean, but the cinematography is very weak. The shots don't seem to carry the same amount of purpose as in 28 Days. But they both of these films suffer from an annoying amount of camera shake. 28 Weeks, much more. It's more forgivable in 28 Days Later. That was kind of popular to do back then, but I've always hated camera shake. The same thing to go along with the jump scares. In 28 Days, the jump scares are very strategic, so they don't just feel like they're put there to just make you jump. In 28 Weeks, the jump scares don't really serve a purpose other than to kind of wow, like be like a wow factor. Like, wow, you got me. That was scary. You popped out of the screen. And 28 Days Later, the deaths are very personal. There are more deaths in 28 Days Later that feel like a personal loss. And 28 Weeks Later, it's like they wanted to cram more characters, even if they were meaningless ones, so that they could just have them die for shock value, I guess. The protagonists of the two different films are also what separate them, because in 28 Days Later, we have Jim, who is basically Alice in Nightmare Land, but he finds a new family and embraces human rage to protect them. And 28 Weeks Later, the protagonist is the dad, but then he turns into the antagonist. So then we switch over to Jeremy Renner as a soldier to become the protagonist, but then he also dies. And then it's like, well, who do I care about now? I don't know. The visual effects in 28 Days Later are more practical. There's very little CGI, and it is covered up pretty well with those camcorder cameras because it's already kind of low quality, lo-fi film. So it's kind of easier to kind of sneak the visual effects, the computer graphics into that. It's more of an accent to help the film feel a bit more like it belongs in that world. And 28 Weeks Later, the graphics are very Hollywood visual effects that didn't age very well. But all in all, 28 Days Later is dreamy, small, and personal. It's about losing a family, but finding a new one. It's dark, but it's hopeful. 28 Weeks Later makes the logical step to scale the consequence of the infection, but it does it backwards and doesn't really feel connected to 28 Days Later. Like 28 Weeks Later feels like you could have just put any other title on that film, and you could have kind of imagined that people moving back to this infected city. You could have imagined that something happened in the city and people are moving back, and you could have just imagined this was never connected to 28 Days Later. It just doesn't feel like it belongs in the same world. And it kind of sucks that they didn't do a 28 months later, because to just jump from 28 days to 28 weeks to 28 years, it kind of just leaves you as like a fan of the first film to think, well, what happened 28 months later? How do we skip that 28 mark? And since they're going to make a trilogy of new films, like what are those going to be called? They're going to be called 28 Days Later, the spin-off, or I don't know, what are they going to call that? How do you get to connect the rest of this franchise together in a way that makes sense? Because already I kind of just don't consider 28 Weeks Later to be connected at all. It just doesn't feel like it belongs. And I hope 28 Years Later I hope it's good. You know, Danny Boyle and Alex Garland are both returning. Both of their bodies of work are pretty good. To think that Danny Boyle, who made Trainspotting, both of those films, which I also suggest are very good, but it's just so funny how it's like a drama instead of like a survival horror film. Like Danny Boyle, dude is good. He's a good filmmaker. When you can make two drama films that are connected to each other that are really good in Trainspotting, and then make a horror film that like added to the horror genre, the survival horror genre, like that's range. Danny Boyle is a director with range. But anyways, which 28 film do you prefer? Days or weeks? And if you're watching this after years have come out, does it feel connected? Support American craftsmanship when you buy the Stars and Stripes Freedom Deck. From coast to coast, only available in the USA. Available online from La Casa Loca on eBay and Etsy. Follow us on Twitter at Ghettoplex_MP4, on Instagram at Ghettoplex.mp4, and subscribe to us on YouTube at Ghettoplex.